Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hello, sir. How are
Good
you?
afternoon, Mr. Alexander. Welcome to Laredo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, sir.
Jerry Schwebel, I'm the chairman, and this is the committee. Members of the committee, this is Mr. Corby Alexander Sr. Here's our fourth candidate for the interview today. Just a reminder, just for information from Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, you'll have 25 minutes for your presentation. You'll have 20 minutes to make your comments for your presentation for yourself. And then we'll begin a period of about 16 topics that will cover one question per topic. And depending on time, we may have a follow-up questions as well. But we do have an hour and a half. Try to keep it within an hour and a half time limit, but not more than 2 hours. So what we would like is for, as the questions are asked, that you be as succinct as possible to your questions. Sometimes we tend to, elaborate more, but if you can, and specifically to your experiences that you had in the jobs that you had. So usually however you can do it as you wish. You can sit down, you can stand up. I will tell you that most have stood up for the presentation, then they sat down after the presentation for the question and answer. So once again, welcome. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate the opportunity to come out and visit with you all. I know that I'm the last guy in line, and so I'm going to be very respectful of your time today and stick to the time constraints that were previously identified. But I do want to pause and say thank you for, I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to be out here today. Again, as was mentioned, my name is Corby Alexander, Corby D. Alexander, and I am currently a city manager for the city of LaPorte. A little bit about me, my education: I have 2 degrees from Texas A&M, have a bachelor's in political science, a master's in public administration, public service and administration from the George Bush School of Government and Public Service. In fact, I'm proud to say I'm part of the inaugural class for that particular program. Graduated there in 1999. The one thing that I don't have a certificate for, and that isn't in the presentation, is I feel like I have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks. So I am one of 6 children. My mother was a single parent. She raised 6 of us. Fantastic childhood. But the reason I bring that up, and the reason I think that's important to the communities I serve, is that it was a very early experience and taught me a lot about being resourceful, doing more with less, coming up with outside the box ideas to solve problems. So anyway, so I learned some life lessons that really have impacted me professionally from my mother, and I dare not leave out my grandmother as well. So I was given a list of things, and I just kind of went through that list and highlighted some things, and I just want to briefly discuss those with you, and we'll answer your questions after that. So one of the areas that in my 20 years of local government experience I've discovered is very important is legislative affairs. So throughout my tenure, I've worked very hard to build relationships with both the state legislatures and the congressional legislatures. And that's important because there are times when communities, we need our legislatures, and there's sometimes when we need us. And so that's how and that's what a relationship is. It's give and it's take. And so to do that, I've worked very diligently to be on a first name basis with my state reps and my congressional reps. And one example of when that's really been impactful to me in recently is, I don't know if you guys were aware of the Bigger Waters Act. It was a congressional act proposed in Congress, I think roughly 3, maybe 4 years ago. And it was, in a nutshell, very bad for communities that, like LaPorte, that's on the coast and subject to flooding. It would have raised premiums for flood insurance in some cases 4-fold. And we were really concerned, my community as well as other coastal communities were very concerned about the impact to home sales, devaluations, just a laundry list of things that make this really bad. So I work with a group of coastal communities. We contacted our legislators, explained to them why the legislation was just truly really bad for us. And we're very successful in getting it killed. And so we were very, very pleased that that happened. Also very active in TML. TML has been a great advocate for Texas cities. Unfortunately, this last legislative session wasn't as kind to Texas cities as we would have liked, but we will lick our wounds and we'll be ready to fight the good fight the next legislative session. Next item, if I can remember to advance the screen, capital projects or infrastructure. So I meant to mention that part of the School of Hard Knocks was I started out as city manager of a very small rural East Texas town. And it was a great experience. It's truly a baptism by fire because you learn all aspects of local government and you learn them firsthand. And that experience for me, I was truly the only professional on the staff. Had a bunch of great men and women that worked for me, but it was my responsibility to make sure everything that needed to happen happened. So I had to understand streets, I had to understand water, sewer, and all those things. But it was a community that did not have much in the way of resources, and so for years had neglected its infrastructure. And so part of my task, and to be honest with you, when you get that far behind, it's so incredibly difficult to catch up. And so what that taught me moving forward was we have to be very diligent in addressing our infrastructure needs now, as well as looking out to what they're going to be down the road and making sure we do our level best to address the infrastructure needs today and plan for those long term. To that end, as city manager of LaPorte, when I got to LaPorte, there was no real comprehensive way of dealing with our infrastructure needs. So I developed and implemented the city's first long-term or multi-year capital improvements program. I'm sorry. And that was very, very successful. We worked to identify those critical infrastructure needs, and then we planned on how we would finance them. And I'm glad to say, in most instances, we were able to cash flow most of those capital improvement projects. Also, as city manager of the city of Bonham, I was able to manage some construction-related projects, infrastructure, and both facility-related to address some long-standing needs. But I also know that it's important for any community, I don't care who you are and how well off you are financially, it's important to identify resources outside of your coffers to fund those infrastructure needs. And so to do that, I've had experience with Texas Water Development Board, which I understand this community's got I think a $52 million Texas Water Development Board funding for wastewater facilities. So I've used that. In fact, I introduced Texas Water Development Board funding to the city of LaPorte because I think it's a fantastic resource that many communities in Texas don't know about. So I've used it pretty extensively, and it's been an excellent tool for funding the capital infrastructure related needs that the community has. I'm sorry, one last thing. So the other thing that has been really impactful, I mentioned LaPorte is the city that I currently serve is a coastal community, very, very concerned with flooding activities. Incidents like Harvey, where we received 50 inches of rain dropped in our community in the span of 4 days, I believe it was. But I'm proud to say, here's good news. The good news is that 20 years ago, when Hurricane Allison came through, it dumped about between 25 and 30 inches of rain, and we actually had less structural flooding during Harvey, which was a lot more rain, a lot more intense rain event than we did years ago. And the reason that was is because we've taken in recent years a very proactive approach to addressing drainage needs, identifying resources, working in conjunction with Harris County Flood Control, which is a quasi-governmental agency component of Harris County, as well as Harris County themselves, to deal with our flood needs or flood drainage concerns in our community. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done to improve our drainage-related infrastructure in LaPorte, and for the benefit of our communities. So when we're able to do that, our citizens experience a lot less property loss in the event of a hurricane or significant rain event. So economic development, another area that I really enjoy. I think it's important for any city to take its responsibilities as it relates to economic development very, very seriously. One of the things that I've implemented as city manager of LaPorte, when I got there, the city had done a few economic development projects or incentive deals rather, but it was never tied to any real performance. So what I introduced there was what I call performance-based incentives. So industry X or company X will entertain the notion of a cash incentive or whatever the need may be, but we're going to identify some performance measures. One example will be a restaurant we did an incentive deal with where they had to prove up how many sales they had, how many people they're going to employ. And what the benefit of that was we're able to take from that, extrapolate their financial contribution back to the city via tax dollars or indirect benefits from number of employees in the community, and identify a real rate of return back to the community. And that is what we use to justify the incentive, so and articulate a payback. So along those lines, was able to negotiate a development agreement with a company called MRC Global. They are a Fortune 500 company. We were able to put together a deal whereby they consolidated all of their U.S. operations in LaPorte. And in my opinion, one of the biggest economic development wins for the community. It's $150 million in investment in inventory. More than that in the actual facilities, and a total of 300 plus employees in our community. So it was really, really significant to our community. And the really interesting thing about that project was there was no cash. The city came up with zero cash. We were able to build a relationship with this company, and they really wanted to be in LaPorte. And so we said, okay, well, what do you need? And what they needed wasn't money. They just needed certain variances to accommodate their business needs. They weren't really looking for money. They just wanted to be able to do what they had to do to make their business run. And so we figured out how we were going to give them what they needed that wasn't in cash, and we did a development deal, and it's been a tremendous success. Also negotiated with a company called Ineos. They're a polymer styrene solutions company, and that deal led to a $600 million capital investment in our industrial district. Also, we're currently working with a developer, and the development's actually, I'd say, maybe 10% complete. But that development, it's the city's first mixed-use planned community. It's got nearly 700 single-family units, about 400 multifamily units, and then a commercial, retail, and then an assisted living component to it as well. So something new for the city, and again, when we had this opportunity, we had to find ways to partner with these developers to bring them to our community, and we're very happy we're able to do that. Also wanted to mention that this past year I negotiated 140 industrial district agreements. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but our communities, we have, the law allows you to have an industrial district that's outside of your city limits, and you negotiate with them, and they make a payment to you in lieu of taxes. But so, and the law only allows that to last like 12 years, so every 12 years you have to renegotiate. And we're able to build relationships, negotiate that, and that's going to be worth about $14 million to the city for the next 12 years. That's $14 million per year for the next 12 years. So, transportation. After 20 years in local government, I understand the importance of being able to move goods and people in your community. So one of the things we've done in LaPorte is we've implemented, we work with Harris County Transit to put together a transit service. So it is, essentially we have three routes. We have a circular route that gets people in and around the community. But LaPorte, because it's a community that doesn't have a college, and there are certain social services that aren't available in LaPorte, but they're available in the next community, we put together another shuttle that would help folks get to those services as well. So that's the second shuttle. And then the third shuttle gets people out of LaPorte into Houston, so that now they can access Houston Metro. And so for folks who work in Houston, you don't have to bum rides, you don't have to Uber. We have a very low cost way that we've developed in the past couple of years to help move people in and out of the community. Because we've discovered when you can get people to work, they go to work. And when they go to work, they come home and they contribute, and they're active members of the community. And so that's been an incredibly productive thing that we've done. And one of the things I'd like to point out, LaPorte is a lot like Laredo in that we have a lot of goods that come through our community. We are sandwiched between two of the nation's largest, I think 6 largest, container ports that are part of the Houston Ship Channel. So we have a lot of goods, a lot of warehousing that comes through Texas, comes through our community. And so the key for the city is how do we navigate that? Because we have, they're not really confined to any specific part of town. So we have a lot of trucks that come through and they navigate our streets, and so that creates an infrastructure demand. So we work at length with local organizations, with the Port of Houston, to try to help manage that. And so more recently, we've adopted an ordinance that helps us facilitate truck movement, because we want them to be able to take care of their business in the port, and then we want to get them to shuttle on out of the community. So we've worked on, took us about a year to put together an ordinance that we thought everybody would be happy with, but we finally got it done. And still not everybody's happy with it. Go figure. Ethics, I will say that this is one topic that is incredibly important to me. I strive to be a very ethical person. I have 5 children, and it's one of the things I have relayed to them. Your word's got to be worth something, because there are days in life where all you got is your word. And so your ethics is very important to me. I sit on the ethics board for the City Managers Association for the city. For the Texas City Managers Association. I am one of the board members, and it's always disappointing when we have to investigate city managers for ethics violations. But it is important, I think, for communities that we serve to make sure that the man or woman in leadership is behaving in a very ethical fashion. And if you were to ask folks who work with me, they tell you I demand the same from them. And so what that has meant over the years is there are times where we have to make really tough decisions because people don't share my level of passion for behaving in an ethical manner. One instance, really fairly early in my career, I had a fire chief, and you know, firemen, they always have a side hustle. And this particular fire chief had a fire training school. And he would take our old bunker gear and he'd lease it to his cadets. Well, that's a problem. You're taking city resources and you're turning them to financial gain for yourself. And so we pursued it and pursued it as far as I could, and including going to the DA. And I certainly take no delight in seeing a public servant have to stand in front of a judge and jury, but sometimes it's the most appropriate thing to happen when someone has a lapse in moral judgment. So anyway, I do take ethical concerns very seriously. Employee labor relations, I implemented an employee lunch recognition program where we took top performing employees and just went out and bought them lunch. A group of them sat down and bought them lunch. It's important to me that employees know and understand that I want to know them, want to understand what's going on in their lives, want to value them in a way that it's not just about a job, but it's about who you are, and you mean a lot to me. So I'm pretty diligent in trying to find opportunities to communicate with employees and let them know how important they are to me, not only as an employee, but as a person. And that was one opportunity to do that. I've been called upon in the past to deal with immigration concerns. Had an employee once who had some immigration issues, but very, very fortunate we were able to get it worked out And it's a really complicated maze, but we're able to get the employee taken care of. LaPorte is a city that has adopted Chapter 143 of the local government code, which is essentially civil service for police. It's actually for police, fire, and potentially EMS. In our community, it is only for police. So my job is to negotiate an agreement with the police union. And ironically enough, it has always been amicable. I think it goes back to the relationships that I created with our personnel. And part of what I enter into that negotiation with, as well as any negotiation, is a promise to be fair with you, a promise to be fair with the individual and the organization they represent. And then I do my dead level best to deliver on that promise. And it's my opinion, my belief that when you do that, folks are just as fair with you as you've been with them. And so we've been very successful in negotiating actually the city's first multi-year employment agreement with the police department. Also, as part of my job, I get to, or maybe the term is have to, I'm going to say get to, be the final appeal for any disciplinary action for employees. And this is one of the parts of my job I take the most serious. Not that I don't take the rest of it serious, because I do. But this part is incredibly important to me that we get this part right, because when an employee has an appeal and they've come to me, it's obviously not good. Something not good has happened in their life. They're stressed, and this decision impacts their ability to take care of themselves and their families. And so I take this decision, this part of my job very seriously to make sure employees are treated very fairly. And I can say I'm not aware of any time where any employee walked away feeling that they were treated unfair, because it was something that was very important to me and made clear to them that it would happen no matter what. Next item, fiscal responsibility rather. I see myself as a very conservative manager, but I understand that there's a balancing act, because I have seen what happens when you don't spend money to meet the community's needs, right? I mean, it's got to be a balance. We've got to be frugal, but we've also got to know that we've got business that has to be attended to, and there's things we have to do for the community. So, but I am proud of the fact that since being the city manager of LaPorte, I've increased the fund balance of the general fund and the utility fund by 100%. And because we are a coastal community, we have a higher fund balance requirement than you guys do. I think your fund balance requirement is typically about 15%. We strive for a 90-day cash. We got to have 90 days of cash in the bank, because if something dire happens, we need cash to attend to our needs. When I got to LaPorte, we were meeting that for the general fund, but not for the utility fund. So now we're, of course, meeting that fund balance requirement for the general fund and exceeding it pretty substantially. We're also meeting it and exceeding it for the utility fund. And we've been fortunate to do that while expanding our scope of services, also paying cash for a number of capital improvement projects. But it's been, it's like I say, it's a balancing act, but we've been very fortunate to be pretty successful. But one of the tricks that helps is I've become very adept at restructuring debt. I mean, we are in a, for those who follow finance, we're in a very low interest rate environment. So I've been very diligent to find ways to take advantage of that. Lastly, quality of life, very important. That if your community is going to grow and be a successful community, you got to pay attention to quality of life amenities. So I've done things like improve and expand quality facilities, recruit retail opportunities. People like to be able to shop in their community. We've done a number of beautification projects, and here's the thing I'm probably most proud of is our dedication to providing affordable housing in the community. We've partnered with Habitat for Humanity. We've accessed HUD money for down payment assistance programs, and even when I was in Bonham, we accessed HUD money for owner-occupied rehab projects, which almost always were reconstructions. So it's incredibly gratifying to be able to take someone living in a very dilapidated structure and give them a brand new, safe house that's very energy efficient. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. So we will begin the period now of questions and answers. Like I said, you're welcome to sit, if you want to relax, or stand as you wish. We'll be asking you a total of 16 questions in the first round, and we have an opportunity to answer follow-up, we will. So it'll depend on your responses. And again, I just want to remind you that we're seeking to learn more about you and your experiences in your prior jobs versus what perhaps has happened in your particular community, unless it was specifically related to your efforts individually that may add value to you in this interview process. I have the first question in regards to binational or international relations. Laredo is a port city, like LaPorte. Yours is a seaport, ours is a land port. So in your work experience, please share with us if your experiences in working with government or private officials with other countries, which may have led to enhancing the economic well-being of your communities. In our particular case, it happens to be Mexico, but it doesn't have to be Mexico for you. It may be other countries, but specifically, and unless you had some specific relations with Mexico, we'd like to hear that as well.
Sure. So we're not fortunate enough to be on the border like Laredo. So in all honesty, any national or binational activities are very limited, strictly through the port. Like I said, a lot of goods come through the port. So the Port Houston Authority. So my relationships have really been with the port and their negotiation in terms of bringing trade into the community. But I cannot say I've actually done any of those negotiations or had relationships with other countries.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Boyd.
Yes, thank you. With respect to infrastructure, some of our neighboring cities appear to have excelled in the area of development and infrastructure and growth. As a city manager, just coming to Laredo, you may not know about Laredo, but what areas you might see that Laredo may need improvements, and what unique plan might you bring to Laredo to help with development and infrastructure and growth?
So that's because Laredo is a very well-established community. Most certainly, you got to look at your water. You got to look at what's going on underneath the street. Typically, we see what's on the street, and that's what generates the most complaints. My front end of my car is falling off. But I think the first step would be to do an inventory of your water, sewer needs. And there are consultants that you bring in to help with those. But I think it would start with a good assessment of the age, what material, because depending on the type of material, if you've got AC pipe in the ground, it behaves a certain way and it has a certain life of its own. So I think we really have to work with Public Works to figure out what you have in the ground. And I think we could clearly extrapolate from there where our most pressing needs are going to have to start. And then it'll just be a matter of financing, prioritizing those needs and financing them accordingly. Thank you for the answers.
Mr. Reyes. Would you like for me to?
Help me?
Yes, sure, be glad. Mr. Dueñas is going to cover the two topics of transportation and trade, so we're going to focus on you don't speak, do you speak Spanish?
Not enough. Not nearly enough, sir.
Dice que estudió, pero no
Didn't want to make any assumptions, but his questions will be related to trade and transportation. So particular, we have here in Laredo, we have 4 bridges. And we have commercial bridges, and we have pedestrian and vehicular bridges, as well as we have a lot of truck traffic that's related. Yeah. So in his questions, he's addressing more of the traffic-related transportation challenges that the city's having within our city. We have a road, it's called the Mines Road, that where many industrial parks are located. And in that Mines Road, you have activity between 2 bridges, or actually between the far West Bridge and the local community. So do you believe, would you, let's see, I'm going to word this in a way more specific because you're not familiar with Columbia Bridge, but in one of the bridges, which is a Columbia Bridge, it allows for hazardous material. Okay. And so that adds to the challenges of having trucks circulating within the roads, and adds sometimes some concerns. But if you look at any experience or any programs that you're aware of that would be in place that you think would enhance better planning for congestion or infrastructure challenges related to those trucks moving in and out around the city and between our bridges.
Yeah, very good.
Is that fair, Mr. Rogers, what I'm asking? Yes.
Well, that's actually one I think I can speak to. We do, because LaPorte has, we completed a traffic study back in 2014, and we updated the traffic count numbers, just trying to identify the trucks in and around our community each day. Back in 2014, we counted about 50,000 trucks a day. Now we understand that those were probably some duplicates because folks are coming and going out of the port. But even if that number was half, that's 25 unique vehicle trucks in our community every day. Revised those numbers just last year, and the numbers are up to 70,000. And so again, and even if that's only halfway, if you cut that number in half, that's 70,000 trucks in and around our community every day. There's only 35,000 people in the port, right? So our challenge has been, how do we route those trucks in a manner, and what regulations do we put in place to encourage those trucks to take care of business and move out of the community? Because we had real concerns about when trucks are interfacing with pedestrian, not say pedestrian, but passenger vehicles. I'm sorry?
No pedestrian.
No pedestrians. We don't want them. But when they're interacting with regular traffic, it is a concern. So we've established work groups to look at the issue. That has led to regulations in terms of where trucks can park. We've more recently developed programming in terms of what constitutes a truck stop, where they can be in our community, again, to facilitate that truck traffic and to move them where we want to be. But I think the next step for Laredo is going to be looking at not only how do we adopt regulations that manage the behavior of traffic the way we want to. It's actually going to take a critical look at the infrastructure, because there's only so much you can do before you have to truly expand your capacity for vehicles on your roadway. So that's water lanes. There's a lot of technology out there. Water lanes, as it relates to traffic signals, timing those. There's a lot of intricacies associated with moving the traffic to get it to move efficiently. But the goal has got to be to move the traffic and not in a manner that bogs them down in the community.
So it's a follow-up question, I guess, in regard to that, is that, I think you alluded to some of the ideas of how to plan for that flow of traffic, in infrastructure that we have. Is there anything else you want to?
Sí, me da la impresión de que no, sí estudió, pero no me hizo entender que conoce los 4 puentes.
No los conoce.
No los conoce.
No los conoce. Lo que conoce es, en la experiencia que ha tenido él, el movimiento de camiones de carga, por medio de 70,000 diarios, y cómo planea el movimiento entre el municipio para explicar a todos los ciudadanos que viven ahí también.
Diario. Que es un tráfico.
Diarios.
Okay.
So I think it was just clarifying that you have some understanding of, while you don't know our 4 bridges, you do have some understanding of movement of traffic and commerce because of the number of trucks you have between the ports.
Yes, because it's such a major thing in LaPorte. And if I could elaborate, the study work that we started, that I commissioned going on 5 years now, we looked specifically at, we looked at the community as a whole, and we identified points, and so that we could identify how the trucks are moving. And so we identified truck routes. That study helped us to revised our truck route. And so that led to enforcement activities, so that once we identified the routes we wanted the cargo to move through the community and the routes we didn't want them to take, well, there was, we had to follow that up with an enforcement component with the police department.
All right. In our particular case, we have our biggest commercial bridge is already being surrounded by not only industrial park, but by rooftops, by homes. And that's one of the challenges that increases people with more vehicles mixed with trucks. That's why this question is very relevant to us, because of how you plan for the movement of.
Yeah, so, and in fact, one of the things, and I certainly don't mean to hijack this conversation, but one of the things that we as a community have, because of the port, right? I mean, so the generator of the truck traffic in LaPorte is the port itself. It's the goods coming in. And so one of the things LaPorte's doing, and we're trying to find ways to help them, is to move the goods out by rail. If they can find ways to move the goods out by rail, then for every rail car, I think it takes 8 trucks off the road. And so you get a rail car of a train of 100 cars, well, that's 800 trucks that get to come off the road. And so we're doing everything we can. We're actually about to enter into negotiations with a private company that's going to bring in a rail yard over by the port to help get goods and service out. So I think it's also looking for opportunities to move goods and services in ways that don't involve trucks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Alexander, for being here. My question is one of community health. It's related to community health. Approximately 35% of Laredo's population is uninsured, meaning they have no access to insurance of any kind, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no private insurance. What, in your experience, have you done to help that segment of the population, the uninsured population, to have access to affordable health care, both in the inpatient side, the hospital admissions, et cetera, and the outpatient side, primary care, the primary care part of health care, working with FQHCs, and in your case, Legacy Community Health Center in LaPorte. Have you any experience there?
So I don't have any direct experience, but I will say that for a while I thought I did a lot of research in grad school on healthcare administration, because there's some, my mother that I love so dearly has spent a career in healthcare, and so for years I thought maybe I wanted to work in the healthcare administration. So while I don't have any hands-on experience, I do understand the problem, have some ideas in terms of ways that the situation needs to be addressed, but the direct answer to your question is no, I've not been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to actually work and address those needs.
And I do have a follow-up question, kind of in the same realm of community health. Our area has one of the state's highest health professional shortage area scores, meaning we do not have enough physicians or other healthcare professionals in our community. In the past, in your past experience, what have you accomplished maybe in the recruitment of healthcare professionals, physicians and others, dentists into your community?
So again, I've particularly LaPorte and other communities I've served, they've all had the issues that, not a lot of healthcare professionals, but the benefit has been, particularly LaPorte is 30 minutes from the largest medical facility in the world, MD Anderson and the Med Center. So there's never been that effort to bring those resources directly to our community, because they're really so close. But again, that is a subject that I am very passionate about. I think in a civilized country, everybody should have access to health care, and nobody. Okay, I'm sorry that you didn't ask me for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Alexander, you kind of touched upon this already. My question to you concerns ethics. What are your guiding principles as they pertain to your morals, and most importantly, your ethics, and noting that there's a difference between the two?
All right, finally something I can answer. So it goes back. So again, I was raised by my mother and grandmother, two of the most devoutly Christian women you ever want to meet. And so from early on, and it's been how I live, how I train my children, is it's important that you treat people the way you want to be treated. And it's important to know that when you don't have anything else, what you say has got to be true. And so I feel very confident in saying that if you were to talk to anybody that knows me, they will tell you we've never caught him in a lie, because he's never done it. And it's just not, it's just because of my upbringing, I believe, it's just not something that I resort to. I believe that it's very, very unfortunate when adults are less than truthful. And to me, that's the crux of being an ethical person, is communicating the truth to you all, to the city council, to the citizens, all the time. Even when the truth is inconvenient for me, I've got to be able to tell you that what the truth is, and to behave in a moral, and for me, they're hand in glove, right? I mean, I'm going to behave in a way that I believe is morally correct, and a way that I believe is ethically correct. And I'm not sure that answered your question.
It did.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure it is.
My question is regarding to economic development. We have a local organization, a private sector organization called the Laredo Economic Development Corporation. It consists of board members who possess a wealth of knowledge, expertise, experience, and above all, success in their respective fields. The board is comprised of people, or composed of people from banking and finance, commercial development, commercial real estate, international trade, warehousing, logistics, transportation, medical fields, manufacturing, oil, gas, utilities, you name it, they're on the board. These individuals work with a passion as volunteers in promoting and guiding economic development and prosperity for our community. It is my personal experience and observation that our past city managers have not really capitalized on using the experience of this organization. There's a disconnect. I don't want to call it a lack of respect, but there's just a disconnect. And a lot of times when opportunities are presented to the city, a pretty good amount of time goes by, 30, 60, 90 days, with no real responses regarding incentive packages. The support is there financially to a certain extent, but my question to you is, in your present or past roles, have you worked closely with organizations such as the Laredo Economic Development Corporation? What are your thoughts about these types of organizations? And as the next city manager of Laredo, what steps will you take to ensure cooperation and timely support is provided by the city of Laredo to groups such as the LEDC?
So also another one I can answer. So yes, so I have in my past, I served on Community Development Commission for East Texas, and so part of our jobs, and there were lawyers, there were local officials all on the board, and part of our job was to review and recommend SBA loans for startups. So we're looking at their capital investments, looking at their business plan, and really being honest with them in terms of whether or not you had a viable project. And sometimes we're doing them a favor and telling them no because they didn't have the tools they needed to be successful. Also, subsequent to that, I worked with, it was a Bonham Industrial Foundation, which was also a group of bankers, private folks who worked, in my opinion, harder than the economic development team to bring industries to that community. So yes, I would use every resource available to me to facilitate economic development, and that's recruitment and retention of industries. So, and you see how, I think specifically, how would I start that? I think the very first thing would be for the city manager and those key leaders to just sit down and start building a relationship, identifying what is it that they feel like they need from the city but have not been able to get, and figure out how we're going to bridge that gap. And if that's the city manager's responsibility, or maybe it's assembling a team of city officials that will work hand in glove with them. But it's the ideal situation, of course, would be for both entities to work hand in glove to make sure, because you're all working toward the same cause. You're all trying to build a community and provide economic opportunities for the folks here. And so I feel very, very confident I could build a relationship with those groups and find opportunities to work together and make sure that we're successful as a team.
Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Alexander, will you share with us your experience in managing police and fire departments, unions, negotiations with unions, collective bargaining?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, LaPorte has adopted Chapter 143. It was interesting, though, the community could have adopted it for fire, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the state of Texas, EMS only gets collective bargaining if they're part of the fire department. And so there are still communities, and ours is one of them, where the EMS and fire are two separate departments. Anyway, so part of my job is I lead the city's staff side of negotiating with police, and it's been an incredibly amicable relationship. And again, it starts out by me pledging to be as fair with them as I possibly can and delivering on that promise. And so I've done that so much so that we're in the fourth year of the city's first multi-year agreement with the police association. And so it's a matter of, and one of the things I've learned to do over the years is identify win-wins, right? I mean, what is it that, police officer, what is it that you need? And it all comes back to money. I mean, they are certainly called to be in law enforcement, but they're also here to take care of themselves and their families. And so, we give them incentives for staying fit. So, all right, so if you want to increase your income, then there's $500 you can make just by taking your PT exam. There's incentive pay. Well, because we want the best police officers we can get. We want you well-trained, well-educated. We want you physically fit to do the job. So why not pay you for it? And so for everything that we've asked them to do, we've compensated them in some sort of way. And it's turned out to be a really good relationship.
Good afternoon, Mr. Alexander, and welcome to Laredo.
Thank you.
My question is going to be related to sustainable growth. And more specifically, what's the development, you're looking at environmental sustainability, economic and social justice, and entrepreneurship, and making sure to nurture a class of entrepreneurs and developers that are looking at the needs of our community into the future through the lens of sustainability. And things like multifamily developments, walkable, livable urban spaces, vibrant green spaces, and intense dialogue and discussions among these partners with people in the community, all of which requires solid government buy-in. And so I wanted to ask you, in general, what has been your philosophy about growth and development? And then more concretely and specifically, what, if any, experiences have you had with more of a smart growth, sustainable type of development, plan or projects?
Yeah, so I mean that's very important, and again I think it's a balancing act. Every growth is going to create a demand on infrastructure, be it water, sewer, streets, police, fire, EMS. It's all growth is going to create a demand for service. So you've got to know that going in and do your best up front to identify what those demands for services are going to be. For instance, we had a senior living facility develop in LaPorte, and because they're an older population of folks, there's a huge demand for EMS services. They make a lot of calls, slips, nothing really serious, but just the things that older population needs. So you have to first approach that with that understanding. But it's also we have a set of development standards that we want folks to live by. And as we develop those standards, we have to have a mind toward what it means for the community and what it means for the developer. There's two sides to this coin. And so I believe one of the things we've done in LaPorte is, for years we had a very, very aggressive tree preservation ordinance on the books. And we thought that was great because we love trees. We think they're great for the community. We need a tree preservation ordinance in the books. We had a development come along and their tree preservation commitment, because either you can replace trees or you can pay into the fund, and their cost was going to be nearly $1 million. Well, that seemed to be excessive and unreasonable. So it led us to look at, okay, so what are some of the things that we can do better? Maybe this requirement isn't, maybe there's something else that's still good for the community, but good for the business as well. And so we revised that and been very successful in doing that. And from a sustainable standpoint, we looked at, how to encourage greenscaping, drought tolerant plantings. So we provide incentives in the development process if you're going to use that sort of development, those sort of components in your development. But that's kind of the limit to what we've done as it relates to eco-friendly, making sure that we preserve the look and feel that we want to see in the community, but not overburden the developer as well. So.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. We have a school named after you in Laredo. The last name. In Laredo we have UISDs, which pretty much I think is one of the 5th to 6th biggest schools in the state of Texas. I think a little over 45,000 students. LISD, we have the early college. We have an early college campus, and we have about 5 early colleges within different schools. We have Laredo College North, we have Laredo College South, we have Texas A&M International University, we have private school, we have St. Augustine High School, and we have Harmony. What joint projects have you participated with other government entities that have enhanced the economic and social well-being of tomorrow's workforce? Provide examples of memorandum that you participated, created, to enhance opportunities for a strong workforce.
Very, very good. So, I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
That's it.
Okay. So they're in LaPorte. The San Jacinto College is a local community college, and they're 150 foot of the campus, of the central campus, is actually in LaPorte. The rest of it's in the neighboring community. But we've come to understand this. They're a resource for our community, for our children, as well as for our working adults to go back and get all sorts of certificates. So we've been intentional about finding opportunities to partner with San Jacinto College in a way that helps them and helps the community. One of the first thing that comes to mind is we donated fire equipment. Actually, we donated fire trucks. We have a pretty aggressive cycle to replace fire trucks in our community, and we've donated fire trucks to the college free of choice. So it's still a $100,000. Well, when we bought it, it was a $100,000 asset. No, I'm sorry. We paid a lot more than that for it. But we give it to the college, and the reason we do that is because they're going to train the next group of firefighters. And some of those firefighters are going to end up working for the city. Some are going to end up volunteering for the city. And so there's a tremendous win-win. And so that's just the first example that comes to mind of a way in which we partner with them. We let them use fire facilities. We have a world-class fire training field that we allow them to use.
As a city manager, have you participated in any kind of dialogue with the university where creating programs, not only with the student, as you said, but with the high school, so the workforce actually starts at a younger age. So it's very important that they start at a younger age. Have you done anything like that?
No, I have not been directly involved in that.
Or your management?
Yeah, no. My economic development coordinator certainly has. We have in the Houston area. It's an agency called the Economic Alliance, and one of their focuses is on doing exactly that, grooming the next set of work. Because we have employment opportunities in the surrounding LaPorte where you can go to work and make into 6 figures with no degree. With the right technical skills, you can really, really do well for yourself and your family. And so, but my personal involvement has really been limited to some of my staff that has worked with the Economic aligns to foster the programs that they do, the partnerships with the school and industries and the local junior college.
Okay, thank you.
Next question is going to focus on more government affairs representatives or legislative affairs. I know you alluded to it a little bit earlier. Sometimes the cities have a challenge of having to deal with state government or federal government mandates as well. So the question relates more specifically to your thoughts as have you had any experience in dealing with in your current or prior jobs with the hiring of government affairs representatives at the state or at the federal level? And if so, can you share some examples where that relationship has proven to be effective or not in the communities that you serve?
Yes. So most recently, we hired. So typically, it appears to me the opportunities that are presented to local governments, or at least in my part of the world, are partnering. There's a consultant that will come in and say, "Hey, we can do X, Y, Z, but we'll do it for 5 communities. You guys split the cost." And my honest assessment is we get more headway when my elected officials or I actually interface with elected officials on the state level. Yeah. So I certainly don't think that they're not beneficial, and it's not the case that I think they don't have their place. But I'm suggesting that my experience has been that I think we can do a better job of what they do internally, working as a team that's elected official and staff.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Blake.
With regard to city operations, if you could just expand a little bit on your management style and how specific and managing your staff, and maybe cite some examples of how you would deal with conflict resolution between the different groups.
Yeah, well, that's really I only have an hour. But yeah, so but it is an area that I've had a lot of experience with, because let's face it, we're all people, right? And so there's only been one perfect person, and they crucified him. So if that's what being perfect gets you, I don't think I want it. But so as management style, let's talk about staff. My goal is to hire competent folks, give them the tools, equipment they need, and then get out of their way. Support them as much as I can, whatever support they need, then that's what they get from the city manager. And as long as they are being productive, doing what they're supposed to, then I tend to give them a great deal of autonomy. There are times, because we are human, that autonomy has to be dialed back a little bit, and I'm not shy about doing that when it's necessary. I've always managed to have a good relationship with council, even when I've worked for fractured councils. And the trick to that is staying above the emotions, staying above the conflict, operating in honor and integrity, and not participating when there's conflict amongst council. Because when that happens, then there's conflict amongst council and the city manager, and that's not good for the organization. But there are times, because you do have fractions, that it's important for the city manager to be the buffer between the two, and to do what you can to elevate the conversation to being about the issues and the business of the community. And so when there is conflict, I think it's important, and I actually have a little bit of a background in conflict resolution, is identifying the issue and figuring out how we address it. And there are times where the source of the conflict is not anything we can fix. We just got to understand that on this particular issue, we're just not going to see eye to eye, but we're going to have to be adult enough to put that issue behind us and get to the business of governing the city.
Okay?
Anyone else, Mr. Lopez? or
No,
Mr. Lopez
yo
Rodriguez?
me quedé atorado un poco
Ok.
y necesito un poco de traducción.
Okay.
Si Laredo es el puerto número 1 de entrada y cruzan por Laredo 7,000, 8,000 trailers diarias, ¿cómo es que en la Porte cruzan 70,000? ¿De dónde vienen? ¿De dónde salen? ¿Hay algún error?
No.
¿O 70,000 diarias? ¿Lo podrías preguntar ahí?
Yeah, sure. This question is, Laredo is the largest inland port, and we average, northbound, southbound, on average, 7,000 each way of trucks. He's really, and he's in the trade industry, he's really taken aback by the number of 70,000 trucks what is it that
Mr.
that
Chairman, I think
creates?
it's about 14 or 16.
Huh?
I think it's about 14 or 16.
Yeah.
No, son 8 de ida y 8 de regreso.
Yeah. So, he was taken aback by the 70,000 truck figure that you said. What is it that creates that truck activity? And I think I know, I don't want to speculate, but because you have all the major shipping lines in LaPorte
Yeah.
coming to you with containers, ships. You want to elaborate on that?
It's really, I was surprised in 2014 when the number was 50,000. It was hard to believe. But it's our location. We are literally, there's the Barber's Cut shipping channel, all the containerized traffic, and unfortunately, hardly any of it leaves the community by rail. So every ton of product that comes in through those container terminals has to come through the city of LaPorte, and it comes in a truck. So coming and going, it's the port, it's the containerized traffic. A lot of what we see are the plastic pellets. We have a lot of cracker plants that manufacture those plastic pellets, and of course they're manufactured for export. So they're manufactured maybe 2 miles from the port, put on a truck, and then taken to the port for distribution later. So also a lot of chemical tanks, the ISO containers. Those I'm sure you have them here. They're round containers, but there's a box configured around them that lots of chemicals coming and going through the channel in those containers as well.
And just for full disclosure, I have visited LaPorte and been to their container facilities, and that's all of these large ships come with thousands of these containers, TEUs, that are unloaded onto trucks like that we see either in rail or we see them in trucks here. That's why I think that contributes to the number.
Mr. Chairman, I assume that's a 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week operation?
Ironically, it's not. Ironically, it's not. In fact, the port just this summer extended the Barber's Cut operation until, let me take it back. Bayport, the one to the south, no, it's not 24 hours. They have, over time, because they're so close to residential, the city has negotiated with the Port of Houston to limit their hours. So Barber's Cut, the terminal to the north, now closes at 10, and I think Bayport to the south closes at 8 or 9.
Unionized?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Part of the explanation, if I may, might be that some of the traffic coming in and out of LaPorte goes to other U.S. ports, so it's not international traffic like what we're used to here. So you may have more volume in terms of domestic traffic.
Sure.
But what ours is primarily international traffic, so maybe that's where the,
Yeah, and if you go further south, down Highway 146 that runs through LaPorte, you can go to Texas City that also has a very small port, but there are goods that coming through there. So you may have some goods that come from the north side of Houston through LaPorte to get to other ports as well.
and that's what I'm saying, it's U.S. business going to U.S. cities, so
Correct.
it's not international.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Thank you.
I live in Baytown, so
Is that cleared up?
Oh, okay.
so
It can be
Yeah.
I know exactly
Thank you.
where the traffic comes into the channel, goes to Channel View, and then from there it starts dispersing in different places, get to I-10, back to 59, and other places. Right off, and I lived off of 146, so saw that truck traffic 30 years ago when it was just started to sprout.
Oh, yeah, we'd welcome the 30-year traffic from 30 years ago. But again, we've taken efforts to, because if we also know that if there were no trucks, there would be no LaPorte, right? I mean, we understand that. And so, but we do want them to get in and out of the community as quick as we can.
So what was the other question? Ms. Gato?
Yes. My second question has to do with employee and labor relations, and you did touch upon it earlier. But we've had some instability here in the city of Laredo in recent years with high turnover of city managers. How will you address improving employee morale, and how will you motivate the employees?
So I would start by trying not to get fired as a city manager. that would be a significant goal. But the second thing is getting to know the employees, and so it's all about, I believe, communicating with them. So we do an excellent job of recognizing employees who perform well. Every time there's a promotion at the police department, I do my level best to be there, to shake hands, to greet them, to let them know that the city manager is glad that they're part of the team. So I think that you just have to identify programs that will communicate to employees that they're important to the city, and just press on after that. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Woodwise?
Yes. What experiences can you share with us in dealing with sharp declines in revenues or unanticipated budgetary constraints?
So, I read the news, so I think I know the origin of that. And I would say we've been very fortunate that one of the things we do, one of the benefits of having such a healthy reserve balance is we could literally not collect a dime of revenue and still operate the city for another year. So I think.
Say that again, say that again.
We could not collect another dime of revenue and still operate the city for another year without changing anything. So, but that didn't happen overnight. It took looking at our financial situation, and it was a series of good decisions that got us to that point. And so I think it's going to take critically evaluating your financial situation. What are your revenue streams? Are you relying too heavily on some revenue streams that are somewhat volatile? As I understand, there's a hiring freeze because of a revenue shortfall. So I think you got to look at that, and you got to be, and it's going to be some tough decisions that have to be made in terms of how we decrease our dependency on some of those. We tend to think of them as revenue streams that we don't have to pay for because they're not tax related. Well, this is not popular, and I apologize, but your property tax is the most stable stream of income you're ever going to have. And so I think if you're going to survive, if you're going to play the long game, you've really got to make sure your tax structure is where it needs to be to fund your city on an ongoing basis. That's the bad news.
Ms. Cortez?
Mr. Alexander, this is on quality of life, and I wish I could ask you, but I can't because we have to keep the questions pretty much the same for everyone. But I mean, you've really dealt with a petrochem industry and build out, and I'm, just very curious about how you've had to deal with sort of external pollution issues and those kinds of things that may have impacted your community. And I can't ask you that, although I really want to ask you that. I'm just curious. I'm just curious how you've dealt with that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You asked it already.
Where's Rosario? She'll get after
Your
me.
Honor, she's leading the witness.
Well, anyway, if there's time afterward,
Absolutely, I'd love to talk to you.
Mr. Chairman, maybe he can answer that. But on quality of life issue, Laredo's long suffered from brain drain. Parents see their kids, they go
Sure.
off to college,
Sure.
graduate school, and they don't come back.
Sure.
Or people here in their 20s, 30s get good experience, and then for lack of more opportunities will take off and maybe not come back, or things like that. So I wanted to ask you, you know, if you've experienced this issue, and how would you keep local talent or attract them to come back and reinvest back in their community? And the other quality of life issue I wanted to ask you has to do with natural assets in your area, how you maybe have worked with them to make them either economic drivers or great dynamic quality of life places. And for us, you know, I think about one area where they're, you know, where we, and I don't know if you've done your homework coming here, but, you know, the Rio Grande, our river, you know, and the need to turn the page and begin a new chapter and vision for that river. So those are kind of a couple of quality of life issues that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so LaPorte, of course, it's on the port, so our biggest asset is the bay. And so there is what's called Sylvan Beach. So the interesting thing is the beach is actually in our community, but we don't own it. It's actually owned and operated by Harris County, which is one of the country's largest counties. And so, but we've managed to build a relationship with Harris County so that we can sponsor events and those sort of things. Actually, coming April, there's a huge festivities that have happened, and I think it's up to 100 years. But what it does is it draws people who have left LaPorte back for the festivities, and it's, you know, if you really want to engage people, find something for their kids, right? And so that's a big part of that festival, is it's a pageant for the young girls. So so that's an opportunity where we've done some things partnering with the county to try to make sure that Sylvan Beach is an attractive amenity to not only the citizens of LaPorte, but to all of Harris County. And to promote activities. So one of the things we did was we took hotel motel money, and if you're having an event at Sylvan Beach, we'd give you a rebate back on a room block, so that, you know, you come to Sylvan Beach, you use the facilities, because there's also a kind of a pavilion, but it's, you know, like a dance hall, and you can have weddings and receptions and things like that. So if you did that, we would actually give you some money back to help you pay for your facility. And people use that, and unfortunately we stopped offering the program because it stopped being utilized. But that was one thing that I think had some success. I think what we did wrong in that case was we didn't promote it well enough to make sure it was an ongoing success. And then secondly, I'm going to jump from natural asset to how do we keep our kids. So I think we have seen that in our community. We have seen kids, and in our neighborhood, they leave LaPorte and they go to Baytown or they go to Pearland, but they leave LaPorte. And so there's this desire to keep them in LaPorte. And so I think, as I mentioned, if you have things for their kids, parents will gravitate to where their kids need to be. That's what we all do. We make decisions around our children. And so one of the things we've done is we have an awesome park system. We spent a lot of time, energy, and effort to making sure our parks are stellar, so that we can have a quality of life, someplace where you truly want to bring your family. And then secondly, I think you have to understand what the millennial and post-millennial, how they want to live, right? So you have to have living opportunities. And so I know that I was not ready to buy a house when I was 21 or 22. So for years, the city had almost a moratorium on multifamily development. Fortunately, in conjunction with the right multifamily developers, we've been able to put together some projects that are really high-quality Class A developments that are actually, they're under construction now. But my anticipation is that by giving young folks a nice place to live, because that's, unfortunately, kids want something nice because they've grown up in something nice, but they don't have the $40,000 to drop on a new home. I think we'll be able to keep them in the community because we'll have quality housing and great amenities for them. So the jury's still out, but I really think if we'll provide good amenities for the kids and a range of housing opportunities, we'll do a better job of keeping young people in the community.
Garcia.
The Viva Laredo Comprehensive Plan was a citizen-intensive endeavor that required a scorecard, a yearly progress report of each of its goals, and a policy with a proposed timeline for meeting milestones. Please explain to me how your administration has implemented and strategized plans on how to make this work, and how to communicate with not only your council, but with your citizens.
So that's very good. So communicating with citizens, I'll start there. I think it's quite a bit, perhaps easier than it used to be with the advent of social media. Unfortunately, it's kind of difficult to control communications now with social media because information spreads so quickly and so fast, and so there's a need to make sure that it's accurate. So, but I think, you know, obviously social media is the way to communicate with the public, goals and visions and whatever. And what we've done, when I got to LaPorte, they'd never done a strategic plan. They've done comprehensive plans, which were, you know, public participation, long-term planning, what zoning, we're going to zone certain areas, and those sort of things. So it's really comprehensive. But an actual strategic plan for getting things done, they've not had one. So we sat down with the council, brought in a facilitator, and developed the city's first strategic plan. And so once that happened, it was my responsibility as a city manager to charge up the hill with the mission that had been identified. And so that meant the logistics, it was getting logistics. And Mr. Public Works Director, you're responsible for this. And all right, how long do you need to get this work done? All right, and then following up. And so we were able to complete, I don't have the plan in front of me, but I really believe we accomplished 80% of the plan within the first 4 years. But it was a matter of us being intentional about communicating who was going to be responsible for what, and then it was the city manager's job to make sure that that work actually took place.
And funded and all.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, we've covered all the 16 topics, and we have time to have some follow-up questions by the committee as well. So if any committee members, I'm going to start on my left side. If any committee members would like to ask a question, that you're free to do so. Mr. Blake?
Thank you. I'm good.
Mr. Dueñas?
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lopez?
I'm fine, thank you.
I do have questions. On your application, on your resume, you talked about significantly enhanced city's financial position, increasing the general fund by 136%. Was that LaPorte or was that another city?
That's LaPorte. My track record shows that I've increased fund balances, but that's, I highlight that because it's the most flattering.
Yes, it is very flattering. That's why I wanted to know if it was where you were currently at.
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And then you said you negotiated a development agreement that landed the community's largest employer. Can you tell me who that employer was and what did it take to get them?
So that's I mentioned them earlier. That's MRC Global. They are a pipe. They don't manufacture. They're pipe. They do some fabrication. But that was the deal that there was no cash incentive. So normally when we approach economic development, there's an ask for $500,000 or whatever the number is, and then we try to figure out how we make that money back in terms of taxes or other investment. So what they needed was the ability to store their products outside, which was a violation of the overall SCUF for that area. And so it was easy enough. I say it was easy. It took me going to convince a council that this is the right thing to do. We have this restriction in place that if we back off this restriction, we can have this significant investment in our community. And it's turned out to be a great thing for us.
So is it safe to say that it took more work dealing with council than it did with the company to make this happen, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, it is safe to say that.
That's good. Thank you.
But at some point,
Yes.
but that's the job of the manager,
Yes.
right? I mean, it is my job to show you, or show the council, the impact of their decision and why this would be a really good thing for the community. And that same company, the day they had their grand opening, wrote a check to the school district for $75,000. So,
Mr. Ruiz.
As in business operations, city operations also, it's important that you have real good productivity, efficiency, safety, employee training, timeliness, customer service, accountability, and an ability to measure performance so that you can improve what you're doing. What can you tell me about standard operating procedures? What value do you provide? Do they provide? Have you used them in the past? And do the departments that report to you currently have written SOPs?
so the answer to that is yes. The last question is yes and no. It's my experience that SOPs are, there are times where they're more appropriate, right? And so they're great at creating uniformity and certainty, which are all those things that we as human beings value. We want to know that if I do X, Y is going to happen. And so, but I do have some folks who report to me that their scope of responsibilities doesn't lend well to having a defined set of SOPs. But that's not the case for like fire and police and EMS and public works. I mean, we need them to be orderly and make sure that you take step A and step B follows A. And so we have used that, and I think it's very, very good making sure that your output is consistent and that we treat people consistent. As long as they do step A and step B and step C, that the ultimate outcome is going to be the same for everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Ramirez, you have a follow-up
I
question?
do, just going back to your truck traffic, 70,000, what kind of impacts does that type of traffic have to your roads, to your infrastructure, the transient community that's coming through there, on your police, your fire, health department? I mean, you've got 70,000 trucks rolling through your town, beating up your roads,
Yeah.
using your water and wastewater systems, obviously getting pulled over by police or accidents, things of that nature. But what kind of impacts did that put on your system?
So the answer to that is absolutely correct. So we have, and which is very unique for a community our size, but we have a dedicated DOT traffic enforcement team for commercial motor vehicles. We have 5 police officers who have been specially trained, specially certified to deal with DOT-related issues. So just from a cost, you take the cost of having a police officer, a Tahoe, a set of scales, and all the associated apparatus, multiply that by 5, and that's a direct cost to us associated that we wouldn't have if we didn't have the volume of truck traffic. We are fortunate in that, and this is a little bit surprising, many of the roads in our community, the main thoroughfares, are actually county-owned and county-maintained. So, which is good and bad, right? I mean, because we don't have the responsibility of maintaining them, but we also don't get the responsibility of maintaining them because, unfortunately, the county never does it the way we want it done. And so we don't have that burden, but we do have the ability to go in and repair when something gets significant. I mean, 16th Street is one of them. I just got complaints the other day that the trucks and they've torn it up. There's sinks, and so there is a credible drain on infrastructure, and there are times where the county won't respond, and we have to use our resources to address issues that are on county roadways because it's our people, right? I mean, so we do that, but it is significant. It's very significant.
But it's also revenue drive, it's also the revenue you're getting on
Sales tax and fuel
tickets and fuel. So you're not suffering the 5 cents because you're making probably twice the amount of money that you would if you didn't have it either.
Well, no, I mean,
It's,
as I mentioned before, if there were no trucks, there would be no community, right? So, but I will say, I don't think we're not making a lot of fines, though, the average overweight fine is about $10,000. And so, it is a significant return on those tickets.
Keep that to yourself.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, maybe, I'll take that back, but yeah, it's a significant, and it's interesting because, what we see, and it's a frustration, because we'd rather not write the tickets. We'd rather them comply with the law. And every time we write a ticket for being overweight, we feel like a failure. We feel like we haven't done everything we could to make them comply. But having built relationships with some of the truck operators, we've learned that for them, it's just a cost of doing business. And the economy is really good, and that $10,000 fine just gets passed along to the end user. So we pay more for our widgets when we buy them at Walmart because it's just factored into their cost of shipping.
Good thing it only applies to trucks. That $10,000 fine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Ms. Cortez will be very happy that she has time to answer a question.
I know, but before I even get to that, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to follow up on something. I don't know if it was with Mrs. Galo or Mr. Puig, and you were talking about your relationship with City Council and when things get emotional or tense. And I think one area that we have struggled with in this city is we've had really blurred lines between the role of city management and city council. It's really blurred sometimes. And so I wanted to ask you how, because it sounds like you do, but correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you manage an ethically appropriate system that has this purposeful separation between the job of the city manager and city council members and the many asks that they have?
There are times where compromise is appropriate. There are times where there's a concern, but then there are other times where it's just not appropriate, right? There are times where it is the city manager's responsibility to, in a very diplomatic fashion, educate council, citizen, whoever, on what the role, whose job, who's responsible for what, is what I'm saying. I do have a current challenge going on today with a council member who's new to the commission, who's new to council, and truly doesn't understand. I mean, it's not, I don't think he's malicious, he just doesn't understand. And so part of, I feel like my role as city manager is educational. It is doing what I have to make sure you understand what my responsibility is and what yours. I had a council member, this is a little funny, but he wanted to actually write the gender request item. And just a matter of, he didn't understand. I was like, no, that's what you pay me for. And so, but I think it's standing on solid ground, knowing yourself as a manager, what your responsibility is versus what they are. I mean, because if I don't understand my responsibility, there's no way I can communicate that to the council or anybody else. And then it's just as often as necessary to reiterate to folks who's responsible for what. And explaining why. And explaining, I have a rule with council. If you've got an issue, and maybe it's public works related, you need to come through me. I don't need you bypassing me to get to a department head. And they don't always like that, but I explain to them, that's in place because if something goes wrong, you're going to look at me. And if it's my responsibility, I'll shoulder it. But I don't want to be ambushed by anything, just like you don't. And so when I put it to them in terms of explaining why and explaining why it's important that I be involved and that they not sidestep me, it's been a lot more effective.
And if I may now, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask you.
That was a hard one.
Just being in the Houston Ship Channel, I mean, it's a monster globally, and I'm sure very, very prosperous. But at the same time, how have you handled or approached, environmental issues, public health issues, air quality issues, that the community also has to deal with with the petrochem industry and this massive ramp up that's being planned for that area of the country.
Yeah, yeah. So we rely very heavily on TCQ and Ocean to do what they're responsible for. We rely very heavily on Harris County pollution control. When there are issues, usually Harris County Pollution Control is our very first go-to in terms of, and there will be, and I'll tell you, in my neighborhood, quite often there's an operator down the road that cleans those ISO containers, and he vents them and they smell horrible. And so when we smell what smells like sulfur, we know he's cleaning something, and so we call Harris County Pollution Control, quite honestly, because they have a bigger stick than we do. But my emergency management coordinator works very closely with Harris County Pollution Control. And we've done other things like making sure our firefighters have air monitoring devices on the unit, so that if there is any sort of release, that we can monitor it and communicate to the public very quickly what the appropriate action is. We spend a lot of resources in the schools, making sure kids understand and their parents understand sheltering in place and what that means in the event of a release. Yeah, so it's unfortunately we have to do a lot to prepare for when something bad happens.
Mr. Garcia, do you have a follow-up question? Well, I do. I haven't had a chance to ask my follow-up.
You've been very patient. That's good job.
I've been impressed with this company that you all recruited, where there was no incentives and there was no money needed for them. And they went ahead and went beyond that and issued a $75,000 check to the school district.
Well, I say school district, but it's actually the Education Foundation that supports the school district.
But the corporate decision was to give back to the community that also welcomed them. And in any community, we're always looking at creating incentives, but sometimes I'd like to hear your thoughts of what you feel about those businesses and their role within the communities that they come into, where the city, has provided a welcome mat by providing them these incentives. Do you believe that they also have an obligation to participate within the community by supporting programs within the community? They could be educational, they could be environmental, they could be business related, whatever. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's absolutely appropriate, and in fact, I think it's borderline immoral to come into a community and make phenomenal money, like many of the industries in my community do, and not give back. I think it's very, very important. And not to cast any negative aspersions, because many of our businesses do give back. In fact, I was there when they issued the $75,000 check, and I thought we were going to have to give CPR to the executive director of the Education Foundation. But they do. But I do think corporate citizenship is very, very important, and I think it's appropriate to consider that when you are giving incentives, right? I mean, when we're doling out money, we ought to consider the financial return, but we ought to consider what impact you're going to have to the community, be it environmental and be it your contribution back to the Little League football team or the different activities. Because if they don't support it, then unfortunately those efforts go lacking. And so I think it's very, very important. And I would certainly support any effort to hold those guys accountable to be a contributing member of the community.
Thank you. Well, we'd like to leave you some time for some closing remarks, and also give you an opportunity if you have any questions of us as well. So which way you want to go? You want to ask a question, or you want to give closing remarks?
Well, it's late, so I won't beleaguer you guys with questions. You guys have been here.
We still got a few more hours to go.
Oh, really? Okay, all right. So, but I just want to say thank you. It is a great opportunity. What I've seen of the community, I really love it. I'm hoping to get back in time to put on some tennis shoes and walk the square so I can really get a feel. But I really, really appreciate you guys thinking enough of me to bring me down. And I've had a great time visiting with you today. And I would love to be your next city manager.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, enjoy the rest of the evening in our community, and safe travels.
Thank you.
And might I remind the commission here that he has made an excellent choice in higher education.
So it's not a question, but I am class of 97. And I believe if you cut me, I believe in room, so.
You just compromise yourself.
So go ahead and
Go Horns, go.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Así que también festejó el Spiritual
Ms. Hale, if I could ask, if I ask you, we're going to continue some discussion here.
Mr. Slavin.
If I asked Mr. Alexander and Mr. Slavin, if you could take your conversation outside?
Yes, thank you.
We
You ain't gotta go home, but you gotta get out of here.
Thank you so much.
What's going on?
Or do you want to?
Meeting's gonna- Ms. Cabello, Ms. Hale, I would like to go into executive session for some discussion as to the course of today's events, and then come back. Good?
You can go on the same agenda item, which is the interview of candidates, if you're going in for a personnel matter to discuss the appointment based upon these interviews, if that's the reason you're going to go in.
Yes.
Yes, and if there's any questions, legal questions, I'll be there to answer them. So the exception would be 551.071, the legal exception for consultation with attorney, and 551.074, which is the personnel exception. That's what allows us to go in there.
You will join us in the executive session.
And anyone else you think is necessary.
Thank you very much.
Chairman, I make a motion to go into executive session.
There's a motion, there's a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
For the record, it's 6:15.
Do we take a break?
Relax.
I need to comb my hair.
Who's second? Gene? Gene, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I think it's Gene. If not, it was Gene.
If not, it was Gene.
He's always right.
If not, it was
Do we
Gene.
take our materials in there, Mr. Chairman?
That's a question, that's a good question.
Yes.
We should, do we leave our materials here, or maybe we take them inside?
It's up to you.
Did
You
you-
can take
If
it.
you want, take them inside.
Well, we need to, our score sheet, right?
Yeah.
Unless you.
Yes, if we wish, it's up to us.
I mean, they're just the
No, I just want the score sheet, right?